Hey guys, it's Dave and my Ficus benjamina, the 30-year rehab project. And by the way, if you saw that thumbnail and clicked on this thinking, that's who I want my care guide from, you've both made an odd choice and you're my people. Stick with me. I don't think I've ever had to climb into one of my plants for scale before, but here I am right in the middle of this gorgeous plant. It's about 5.5 feet wide, more or less symmetrical. It's about, I don't know, 4.5 feet tall when it's not on its stand. It's back from a pot of sticks, and I'll get to how it got there. But I want to point out that the nickname of this plant is weeping fig. I feel like that's like Hoya and wax plant. I have never in my life ever heard anybody talk about their collection of wax plants, and I've never heard anybody call this a weeping fig. This specific plant has actually earned the moniker of weeping fig. It used to belong to a therapist who was a friend of my wife's. 30 years ago, he moved back to Canada. Kathleen took it over, and she put it in her beautiful old apartment she had at the time. Flash forward many years, I met Kathleen, and through her work, I kind of shyly stalked her for a year, stopping by to say hi to a friend of mine, but kind of trying to awkwardly engage her in conversation, if you can imagine me shy. Then one day, bravely, I said yes when she asked me out on a date, and I got to see this plant in person. It looked like most Ficus benjaminas, which is to say, okay. Stemmy, you know, trunky, whatever you want to call it, and missing a lot of leaves. Then we moved in together. Didn't do any better in the duplex I had been a bachelor in. Then we got this house after we had been married a couple of years, and it improved a little bit. I'll include a picture of the room it was sitting in at the time before I started the restoration on that room. It came down here. It went back upstairs when we were having some work done, some insulation done, and the front door had to be open for extended periods of time. It got closed in that room, and that's when it turned into a pot of sticks. So, 3 years ago this spring, we were shopping out at a Mennonite store where they had these beautiful pots that are from China, ironically enough, and bought a couple, potted this up, and decided to take it seriously. So I gave it a big haircut, meaning all the dead-ish sticks, just to see what would happen, and it came back pretty nicely. I've heard this plant referred to in the same breath as a fiddle-leaf fig. I have two problems with that. One, I do not like fiddle-leaf figs on any level at all, period. That's the end of that discussion. Two, when a fiddle-leaf fig loses a leaf, yeah, you can do the notching and the cakey paste and try to get it back or try to get it to branch. This will fill back out, and we're going to do some tip pruning today. But the first year, it just sort of was coming back. Last year, as you can see, it really started coming back. Now there's a ton of new growth on here. I think this will be the year that it really, really fills out. This is the plant in my entire collection that would be the last man standing. My favorite plant is the staghorn fern, which would not be a particularly convenient only plant to have. Actually, it might be more convenient if that was the only plant to have. Look at the picture of this, and if you saw the video from last year, which was one of my first, it has grown at an unbelievable rate, and I love that plant so much, and I feature it. But it's a wall-hanging plant, and while it's a true statement piece, this has more of that lush foliage. It's a tree. It's a tree inside, and I really appreciate it, and it fills a lot of space kind of right behind a sofa and by the orchids and Hoya, and it's just a lovely place for it to be. Lord knows we do not need one more video with someone saying bright and direct light, well-draining soil, doesn't want to have wet feet, sun will scorch the leaves. Sun will scorch the leaves, and it'll do it quickly. So maybe that's worth mentioning. I'll get to a larger point on care. It's kind of the secret handshake if you're a beginner at this. But I grew this somewhat unconventionally. So poking around on YouTube and the internet, did I learn anything new about the plant? No, not at all. But there were a couple things I think were worth talking about. One was quite amusing to me. It's probably true that this plant doesn't love to be moved from location to location, but the person equated it with imagining it outside where it grows, it wouldn't be moving around, and said that quite earnestly. And, well, I'll agree. If this is planted in the ground, it ain't going nowhere. The other thing I learned about this plant is that it would prefer a higher humidity environment. I'm sure that's true. They said there are better choices if you have low humidity. I have very low humidity. As you can see, this plant is looking mighty, mighty fine. Not a bunch of dry leaves flaking off and dropping to the ground. For me, I went for decades without understanding the relationship between humidity and the benefit to a plant. So I'm going to touch on that briefly, but I do want to share an experience with you that I just had. Many of you know that I live in Iowa. We have forced heat all winter, and I supplement that in the living room. The other morning, both of my humidifiers stopped at the same time, roughly. I fill them up at the same time. They run out of water at the same time. I used to have 3, but when I was cleaning it with vinegar and so forth, there's one little part that says do not allow water to get in that little. Anyway, I have 2 now. And the humidity at that moment was 8:10 a.m. It was 33%. At 8:30, it was 22%. And by 9 o'clock, it had dropped into the mid-teens. Those humidifiers had been running for 24 hours a day for weeks. So inevitably, I got to the video that recommended if you live in a lower humidity environment like I do, misting the plant a couple of times a week would be beneficial. The only thing that's going to do for me is to put dust water spots all over this plant because I have not washed it since the fall. It is not going to raise the humidity. It'll just get it wet briefly and probably make a mess. The stomatal aperture of the plant opens wider to take in more carbon dioxide when the evaporative conditions around the plant improve, meaning more moisture and air. It can then risk letting go, transpiring more water with that aperture wider. It's not going to do that as much when it's dry. And simply spraying down these leaves is not going to give the plant that sustained humidity that says, oh, it's okay to risk these leaves losing water. So if you like misting your plants down and you don't have fungal issues, no harm, no foul. I have no fungal issues here. I could mist this thing day and night if I wanted to. But I do know that, as I just illustrated, without 2 humidifiers running constantly, the humidity is right back down into teens right now. No reprieve, no hanging around 30%. Forget 40 or 50%. I mean, that's a dream. That's a dream that will wait until this spring. So that's a basic explanation of it. It's backed up by the National Institute of Health. They did their own study on some different kinds of plants, but they were just basically confirming other studies. So a study to study other studies. However you want to put it, they did verify that, and they used strips on the leaves and sciencey stuff, I guess, that when it is a sustained humid level around the plant, that stomatal aperture will open, and when it's not, it will not. So that's your relationship between humidity and the health of your plant. Pruning this plant could not be easier, and it's called tip pruning. I have my bonsai scissors that have been sterilized. I am not going to worry about getting this plant perfect. I do not care if it's a little lopsided or if it's a little more weeping here than there and so forth. There's actually like a 1.5 foot one that's growing straight up, and I'll just tip prune it, and that I'll do some close-ups, but I literally am just going above a node like you would a Hoya or anything else and just taking a cutting. I mean, it's no more complicated than that. I don't think I have my focus set for close, so that was probably completely out of focus. And that's all you do. There's a ton of new growth on this plant. When you do this tip pruning, you're going to inspire this plant to put on more growth. So when I say that this is going to be the year that it really, really fills out, it's looking fantastic now. And again, for scale, I'll get back in the plant, but it could do more, no doubt. But this was literally 3 years ago, a pot of sticks into the plant you see now. So let me just really quickly do my pruning, and then I'll get right back with you on how I take care of this plant. You should definitely see some white sap on any healthy stem you cut. Again, just above that node, just like you would a Hoya, philodendron, anything else. Nothing real special there. Don't even need your bonsai scissors. You can probably use toenail clippers. Very, very thin stems. Apologies for the little different framing. I did the hilarious thing on a Sony camera where I was recording and finished, flipped the LCD panel, and it didn't save the ending. So I was getting to care. And what I forgot to mention about this plant, when it came out of that therapist's office, having heard many, many, many hundreds of sad stories, the plant was equally sad. It was in horrible condition. Over the course of many, many, many years, it got to okay before I locked it away and forgot about it, turned it into sticks, and then now have this beautiful plant. I will get to some of the more unconventional care that I give this plant, but first, lots of people want to know how I feed my plants. Haven't shown this in a long time, even though I use it all the time. The GT Foliage Focus, introduced in the States almost 2 years ago. I might have been the first customer, I don't know. No, of course not. Lots of people wanted this product because Sydney Plant Guy. Really, really happy with this. I have it linked in Amazon if you want to take a look at it. I feed this most waterings. Occasionally I take it over to the sink. Well, I always take it over to the sink, but just run plain water through it. But generally speaking, I am feeding this plant with every watering all throughout the year. In terms of frequency watering this, I keep it on the moister side. Now, I have read that there are some people who let it go all the way dry. I would imagine they live in a more humid environment than I do. And then there is the recommendation to water it when the top inch or two is dry. I would drown this plant by spring, and that's like 1 month away as I film this. So both of those are bad advice for my environment. I ignore that. Experience has taught me that if I let this plant go dry, which I do on accident sometimes, it will drop leaves. These are very thin leaves in a drier environment. In the summer, it's less critical. Another terrible idea for my environment, the size of the pot, the media it's in, which is probably cocoa coir, perlite, maybe some charcoal. Really, really simple. It drains well. It dries at a predictable rate. It works for me. Light being the most important thing we can provide to our plants, and given that almost every recommendation for every plant, exceptions of course, is bright and direct light, I give this plant less light than my snake plant gets. Less light than the snake plant. It is several feet back from an east window, but off to the side, the dark side of the window. So as that summer eastern sun comes in, this plant's not getting any of it. It is adjacent to a south window, which gets great light, indirect light in the summer, but it's way back from that as well. So it's in a much, much darker spot than you would imagine. And that's why generalized advice can be a starting point. But I wouldn't recommend this to anybody, by the way. If somebody gave me this plant and said, put it in the darkest part of your bright living room, I would think they were crazy, but it's clearly doing very well. It would do better, I am sure, if it had greenhouse conditions, which I would love to have, but it's doing great there, and I'm certainly not going to move it. The secret handshake is very disappointing, because the secret handshake is, there is no secret handshake. You know, it's been said many times on YouTube, but I'm going to say it a little more firmly. We don't know anything about your household conditions. Absolutely nothing. And if you're new to growing houseplants, know this. Everybody you watch on YouTube was once new to growing houseplants. And a lot of the younger people started during lockdown, and they were bored, and they've grown into excellent indoor gardeners. You can do it too, for sure. There are going to be ups and there are going to be downs, and you are going to take those experiences with you to the next plant and the next one and the next one and then the next family of plants. And you're likely to have better success, even if the care for a new family of plants is very, very different, because you will have mastered understanding the conditions in your environment. Is that a secret handshake at all? No, it's really not. We don't know anything. That's not a secret handshake. But I still want you to come join me in the next one real soon, okay? Bye-bye.